Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriella Grasso. I'm a journalist, and with Q-Code Mag, which is a magazine, a web magazine that has been online for 8 years now and covers stories from all over the world, and also has a print edition, which is printed every 6 months. We are very happy to introduce a series of interviews with writers from various countries. The idea with Q-Code Mag is that of opening up to different points of view, to build bridges between cultures, and that is a reason why we decided to do the interviews in English, so that as many people as possible could follow, and also we could chat directly with the authors. It is a great pleasure to have with me, connected from Mexico City, Jorge Volpi. Hi, Jorge.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation.
Who has just come out in Italy with this book that I'll show you, Un romanzo messicano, published by Bompiani with a translation by Bruno Arpaia. The book was first published in Mexico in 2018 with the title Una novela criminal. So I'll say some words about the book and then we'll start the conversation with Jorge. Un romanzo mexicano is a non-fiction fiction novel. In Spanish, they also say una novela documental. It means that the writer writes a story which is true. It has real characters and a real plot. This novel in particular revolves around a court case which was very famous it has been very famous in both France and Mexico, because the two main characters, the two people involved, were a Mexican man called Israel Vallarta and a French woman called Florence Cassez. The case was also covered by the Italian press, but of course not as much as the Mexican and French press. In 2005, during the presidency of Vicente Fox in Mexico, many kidnappings took place. People were kidnapped for money, and from what I gather from by reading the book, the public opinion was very scared. There was much attention on these happenings, and Israel and Florence, who were then a couple, they were charged with the kidnapping of 3 people and arrested for the crime. Their arrest is one of the few undeniable facts of the whole story, because the rest is a very complex and intricate mixture of false accusations, false proofs, political economic interests, corruption, and everything altogether makes it difficult to tell right from wrong, even after a long, search for the truth, like the one that Jorge has been doing. So now, Jorge, I hand it to you. The first question that I would like to ask you is, well, first of all, this is one of the rare novels where there is no spoiler alert, because of course everything is out there. You can go on the internet and you know exactly what's going to happen at the end of the book. But I have to tell as a reader that this does not spoil the reading, the pleasure of the reading at all. So when we get to the end of the book, which, as I said, was published in 2018, we know that Florence has been set free in 2013 and Israel is still in prison and still waiting to be judged. So first of all, is this still the case, or what's happened in this last 2 or 3 years?
Well, thank you very much, Gabriella, for this interview. I'm very happy for the translation of this book in Italian. It has been published also in French 1 year ago. Mm-hmm. And there is going to be a Netflix documentary series that is going to be presented next year, I think. So it's a
2022.
Yes, exactly. Okay. It's an amazing story and an awful story. Since the publication in Mexico and in France, Florence lives in France. She's free, and Israel continues to be in prison without sentence. He is imprisoned. He's going to be 15 years now since he was arrested. And this is a violation of human rights everywhere, but because it's impossible to think that a person could be in a process without conviction for 15 years. But the new developments of the story since the publication of the books are very interesting too, because the head of the police that settled the arrestment of Israel and Florence was arrested himself in the United States 8 months ago in charges of being in liaison with the narco traffickers that he was pursuing. So right now, Genaro Garcia Luna, the chief of the police at the time, and the man who settled all the Vallarta Cases case is in prison in the United States. And the other policeman, Luis Cárdenas Palomino, his right hand, is also searched for crimes related to drug traffic. So the new developments are not around the case of Israel, who continues to be in prison, but with those who pursue them during their tenure in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11.
My God. So yeah, and the two people you're talking about, they're very present in the book, of course.
Exactly.
Because so let's go back for a moment, and then we'll go back. Of course, we will get in the story. But I would like to know, how did you get passionate about this story? When did you decide to write a novel? And also, I was going to ask you, how do you write a novel? How do you write something that still has to be a novel, but based on true facts? How do you mix, facts with pure, invention?
Yes, well, there are very good questions. The case was very important in Mexico and in France, so I followed the case since the beginning. But I didn't saw in television the arrest of Florence and Israel, because at the time I was living in Spain, but at the time I had a French girlfriend. So it was amazing to talk with her about this other couple of a Mexican and a French woman who were arrested in Mexico and accused of kidnapping. But because at the time, everybody thought that they were guilty. Since then, I continued to follow the case during the years, and I came back to Mexico in 2007, and I was the head of a cultural TV station in Mexico in 2009, when President Sarkozy of France visited Mexico and talked a lot about the case in a confrontation with Mexican President Felipe Calderón. So I saw that directly. I was invited as head of this cultural TV channel to the dinner that Calderón gave to Sarkozy. So I was very far from them, but I saw them in the distance. And after that, I was invited to the Mexican Cultural Year in France that was canceled after the visit of Sarkozy to Mexico and the confrontation with Calderón. So it was a case that was around me. I don't know exactly why. And after that, I continued to follow the case, and I read a wonderful journalistic book about this case by the Belgian journalist Emmanuel Stills. That was very interesting for me. And at that moment, I thought that it would be a good idea to tell the whole story, because the other books that were published around the case were on particular subjects. Steele's books, for example, was around Israel Vallarta's family especially, and there were other books around other particularities of the case, but there was no book about the whole story. that is the story of Florence and Israel, the love story, the story of their families, the story and the plot behind that, to try to understand why they were accused in the first time for this kidnapping, the political arena in which everything happened in Mexico, the diplomatic struggle between Mexico and France, and at the end, the judicial story that ended with the liberation of France. So I thought that it was a good idea to do that. And at the time, I immediately became aware that I didn't want to write a novel based upon the actual facts. I wanted to write a non-fiction novel, as in Cold Blood by Truman Capote and other writers in this kind of genre. Why? Because in this case, the fiction was in the words of the authorities, of the policemen, of the politicians. They all lied around the case, so the fiction was there. Even the program, the TV show that was made around the arrest of these two people was also a fiction. So it was impossible for a writer of fiction like me to write another fiction around a fiction made by the authorities. Yes. So I decided that the idea for truly wanted to narrate this story was to keep myself around the facts. So there is no invention and no fiction in this novel, except when I tell directly to the reader that I'm going to imagine some particular part of the case that is not clear. But except for that, there is no imagination. So the literary part of the book is not around the fiction or the imagination of the author. The literary part of the book is the construction of the book. That is a novel because I wrote this book in a very similar way as I have written all my other fictional novels. So the structure, the construction of the characters, the plot, the information that I keep in the book, the unfolding of the story is the same as in a fictional story, but I always keep around the facts and I don't invent anything. I have interviewed all the people that are around this case. I made a very thorough research in the judicial archives to try to read and understand the summary of the case. I read all the books and all the press notes, and I saw all the TV clips around the case. And with those facts and information, I constructed the novel.
Now, let me read something. I read it. I read the book in Italian, so I'm going to translate this passage from the book in English. But just to get back to what you said before about the scene when Israel and Florence were arrested. You write, one of the advantages of a novelist is that it is not difficult for him to detect a non-plausible scene. In other words, a false scene. And you write this in particular about the main scene of the story, as this is a novel, as you were saying, when the police operation during which Israel and Florence are captured is shown on TV. Now, I know how, and you said it, that it was like fiction, it was not real, but let's tell the people who are listening what happens.
Well, that was the 9th of November 2005. And at 6:47 in the morning, the two principal TV news shows in Mexico presented the show, and the anchors said that they were going to show directly live the arrest of two kidnappers and the liberation of their victims. So during 2 hours and a half, we saw live this show that was prepared between the TV stations and the police. And we can see, and if our public could see that in YouTube, because there are clips that continues to be there if you want to see them, where we see different parts of these long TV shows showing the capture and the liberation of these three victims. And there are a lot of inaccuracies, and there are a lot of things that if you analyze them thoroughly, you could have seen at the moment that there was a lot of things that were absolutely incredible for a live transmission of the capture of two kidnappers. The transmission started with a lot of policemen fully armed that were trying to enter this property in the southern part of Mexico City. So with all the full force, they forced the door, enter a big courtyard, and when they are going through the house where the kidnappers or the presumed kidnappers and their victims are, the door of this house at the end of the courtyard opens from inside because the police was there already. So it was an enactment of a capture. And you could see a lot of things like that. In other part of the video, you could see, for example, and this is awful, the torture live of Israel Vallarta. The TV reporter asked him if he is guilty. He's on the other side of the camera, and a policeman, that is Luis Cárdenas Palomino, has his hand on his neck. And when he tries to explain, the police pushes very hardly the neck of Israel in an act of torture directly live on television. But at the time, we didn't saw that, or the majority of the public in Mexico didn't saw all these details that could tell us that it was an enactment and not a real capture. But fortunately, there was a young Colombian reporter that worked for the Mexican TV station that actually saw all these details. And she thought, this is impossible. A live show isn't never like this perfectly made. So she started her investigation, and she made very thorough investigation that was presented in February 2006 and revealed that the whole capture was this enactment, this fiction made in complicity by the police with the TV stations.
There are many amazing, reading the book, you find so many facts and so many scenes that you really think, no, this is not possible. This is not possible. And then you know they were, this is what really happened. So it is really interesting and also very upsetting because, reading it from another country, the question that comes on the mind of the reader is, what about the public opinion? The public opinion in Mexico, what, with all the corruption and all the things, as you were saying, two of the people, after many years, have just been arrested. So how does public opinion in Mexico deal with these facts and this? Because as you were saying, it was a fiction, but then someone said and pointed out that it was a fiction. So what is the position that the public opinion stands for in Mexico?
Unfortunately, during many years, the public opinion in Mexico was completely manipulated by the politicians and by the police. So even when in 2006, after the research of this young Colombian reporter and her chief, a very well-known Mexican anchor, after the fact that the chief of the police, Genaro Garcia Luna, actually acknowledged that this was a fiction, they continued to say that yes, this was a mistake, we enacted capture, but the two, Israel and Florence, are guilty. And not only the chief of the police, but also the president, Felipe Calderón, continued to say during his tenure that they were guilty, even if the proofs were also manipulated, even if the witnesses were manipulated or created. So it was a whole conspiracy only made for political purposes. Mm-hmm. So during 10 years, more or less, the public opinion in Mexico continued to believe that even with all this manipulation of the facts, Israel and Florence were guilty. And it was not until the publication of several books, Emmanuel Steele's book, José Revelo's books, and other books that were around the case, and even my own book, that the public opinion in Mexico started to change the perception around the case. So even 2 months ago, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, in one of her news conferences in the mornings, talked about the case, and he even acknowledged that this case was a manipulation and the invention of a crime that wasn't there. Unfortunately, this saying of our president didn't have the consequence or the immediate consequence of liberating Israel.
Yeah. So you were saying about the political interests that there were in keeping these two people in prison. And I will ask you about the relationship between Sarkozy and President, who was it at the time? Calderón. Because what really strikes the reader is that President Calderón runs the risk to ruin and to damage the relationship with another country, a European country, in order to keep this woman in Mexican prisons. Because, of course, Sarkozy is asking for extradition, and Calderón, one day after the other, says no, finds different ways to say no. So what kind of pressure did Calderón have to run the risk to damage the relationship with another country to keep a woman in prison?
At the time of the rest of the capture of Israel and Florence, Genaro Garcia Luna was the head of the federal police. But after that, Calderón named him the Secretary of Security in Mexico. And he was in charge of the war on drugs. That was the main policy of Calderón government. So Genaro Garcia Luna was the strongman of Calderón, was the most powerful political people in Calderón's cabinet, with all the information about drugs and traffic and crime and everything. So a witness at the time told me, joking, that Calderón was kidnapped by Genaro Garcia Luna. So the idea is he was so powerful at the time. He has the main goal of struggling with drugs war that Calderon didn't want to risk the post and the people who he trusted more in his main policy at the time. So that was the main thing about Calderon, always protecting Genaro Garcia Luna. Okay. Right now, for example, after the capture of Garcia Luna in the United States, accused of collaborating with the narco-traffickers, with the drug dealers, Calderon told that he wasn't aware of who was exactly Garcia Luna at the time. But that is all evidently a lie, because he was his strongman. He was the people he trusted more in the policy that he wanted more and was most important to him during his tenure.
Okay, very, very clear. Now, time is running fast, so I will. So I want to ask you something about Israel. After meeting him, because you met Israel more than once, I think, you write that you feel, I think that was after the first time you meet him. You say that on one hand, you feel that you can trust him, but on the other hand, you don't want to be blinded by the empathy that all writers feel for their criminal characters. Then at the end of the book, you say that you still have no sure answers about him. You still cannot tell if he's a criminal or just a victim of the system. So tell us more about this complex and unreadable character and your relationship with him.
Yes, his character is very untenable. This is very difficult to approach exactly who he is, Israel Vallarta. I am completely sure that of what he is accused now, he is not guilty. But many people around him are not very sure what other kind of activities he had at the time. So maybe he was in charge of reconstructing cars that were shot in accidents. So maybe there was some criminal connections around this business. But of the kidnapping of these three people, I'm 99% sure that he is innocent. And I think that he is evidently a victim of the system, because the system has to prove that he is guilty. And what the system has done until now is only manipulate witness, his family, and the proofs, only to show that he's guilty without any actual real proof. So he has to be free. And even if he's an illicit character, even if he is difficult to assert which is exactly his way of seeing things and what are the other activities that he had at the time, he has to be let free right now, because in this case, he is without a doubt a victim of the system.
Yeah, you make it pretty clear in the book that this is a question of human rights.
Exactly.
Okay, so my last question before asking you to read the first page of the book is, I mean, in the book you really discover a lot of really bad things that happen, you know, behind the scenes of politics. And considering all the corruption and even the heavy, you know, the heavy hand of the politics, for example, with the tortures that you describe, why do you were investigating on the case? Did you find any obstacles? Did you have moments in which you were scared, maybe?
Fortunately not. I was a little scared when I was writing the book, because I was talking about very sensitive issues in politics in Mexico. And I was directly accusing Genaro Garcia Luna at the time, who at the time continued to be free and a very powerful man. Right now he is in prison, but at the time I didn't know what could he do about this whole story. But was very lucky, and I hadn't any trouble and any problem during the research or after the publication of the book. Even if Mexico, as you know, is one of the more dangerous countries in the world for the exercise of journalism. But I was very, very lucky. Maybe because I'm mainly a writer and not a reporter or a journalist. I think that that was maybe one of the things that made that I wasn't threatened or anything like that.
Okay. And after the book came out, how was it received in your country?
It was very well received. It was the bestseller book of the year that year in Mexico and some other Spanish-speaking countries. And we are settled to present this new series next year. So it had a really wonderful success, and it was very well read and discussed in the public opinion in Mexico. So I'm really happy about that. But I am happy because after 2 years, Israel continues to be in prison.
Are you going to be involved in the writing of the TV series?
I'm a consultant with the series.
Okay, great. Well, it'll be. I thought about a series actually while reading the book, so I think it will be a great product for TV. So I would ask you if you want to read us the beginning of the book. You told me before that you're going to read it in Italian, so go ahead. Just the first 15 lines.
Yes, thank you. Il modo migliore per iniziare una storia è farlo con un'altra. Per raccontare il caso di Israel Vallarta e France Cassé, i protagonisti di questo romanzo documentale o non fiction, devo rivolgere lo sguardo verso un personaggio apparentemente secondario. Si chiama Valeria Ceja. Ha da poco compiuto 18 anni e studia in un liceo privato di Città del Messico. Un'adolescente di classe media come tante, vanitosa, festaiola, avida di mondo. Osserviamola la mattina del 31 agosto 2005. I capelli neri, la camicetta bianca, i pantaloni blu, scheziati di bianco dell'uniforme. Di solito, Valeria passa a prendere le amiche con la Seat rosa che le hanno regalato i genitori, ma oggi deve essere interrogata per la prima volta e preferisce andare da sola, consapevole che ogni mattina a Città del Messico si trasforma in un campo di battaglia in cui milioni di automobili si sorpassano e si accannano in file interminabili a una velocità che raramente supera i 20 km all'ora.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Usually we read the book in English, even if it's written in other languages, but in this case, you told me has not been yet translated into English. So it was either Spanish or Italian. So I'm glad that you read it in Italian. Thank you. So here it is, Jorge's book, again, Un romanzo messicano, published by Bompiani. Thank you, Jorge. And I really hope people will read this book because you really read it like a novel, and you enter in a world of reality. So it's really great under this point of view. Okay, thank you, and thanks everybody for listening.